June 24th, the day of the summer solstice, 1967. Six young cavers are making their way through the labyrinth of Mossdale Caverns. They had already covered kilometers from the entrance and were deep underground, approaching still unknown chambers and passages that were their main objective. They had already passed sections with such reassuring names as Swim or Die, made it through the rough and nutcracker passages, and finally left behind them the 300-meter marathon passage, a narrow, low tunnel that could only be gotten through by squeezing sideways through flowing water. They had been underground for many hours already and were approaching a section of the cave known as Far Marathon. The mood in the group was excellent. The young people were joking and laughing, anticipating a successful passage through new sections of the cave, and with it, recognition within the caving community. But suddenly, someone quietly said, "Do you hear that? What's that rumbling?" At first, their companions thought they were trying to scare them and laughed it off as a joke. But a moment later, everyone could hear the ominous gurgling. A strong draft swept through the cave, throwing cold spray into the cavers' faces. They looked at each other and understood everything without a word. The water level in the cave was rising rapidly, and this was every caver's worst nightmare: a flood inside a cave. The Mossdale Caverns had not been fully explored, and no one knew whether it would flood completely or not, or whether there were places inside the cave where they could wait out the flood. However, the group did not panic. Instinctively, they began crawling faster, but each of them knew there was nowhere to run. The oldest of them was only 26, the others were much younger. Within a few minutes, their bodies were already splashing in the water, their arms and legs braced against the ceiling of the passage. Their faces were separated from the rock by mere centimeters, centimeters of air gap on which their lives now depended. But let's say a few words about the cave itself. The Mossdale Caverns system in Yorkshire is considered one of the most complex cave systems in Britain. Mossdale Scar, a crumbling limestone cliff, sits on the desolate Coniston Moor. Mossdale Beck flows into it, disappearing somewhere in the depths of the rock and emerging on the other side, passing through the limestone hill and forming intricate caverns inside it. Grim and rarely visited, the cliff looks eerie even in sunlight. The stream that enters the cave exits the rock 8 kilometers away and 300 meters lower down the slope. Over long years, the stream had carved out an enormous cavern inside the limestone hill, one that some even call the largest cave in Britain, and cavers had long wanted to enter on one side of the hill and come out the other side, since the cave was evidently a through passage, but the elusive connecting route that would allow this kept escaping them. But let's return to our story. On the morning of Saturday, June 24th, 1967, 10 young people set out from the village of Kingsdale. This was a mixed group drawn from 3 caving clubs. Only 2 of them had been to the Mossdale Caverns before: 26-year-old Dave Adamson, who took on the role of leader for this expedition, and his recently married 24-year-old friend Jeff Boireau. Both were from Leeds University. They were joined by John Ogden, Jim Cunningham, and John Shepherd, all 21 years old. They had come from the Happy Wanderers Club in Bolton. The rest were members of the Bradford Caving Club: Colin Vickers, 23, Bill Frakes, 19, and a newcomer, Michael Ryan, who was only 17. Besides the men, there were 2 women: Colette Lord, 19, who was accompanying the Bolton trio, and Morag Forbes, 22, who was engaged to marry Adamson. Adamson and Boireau's goal was to clear the blocked passage known as Mini Cow, which was obstructed by enormous boulders. They intended to move the rocks and break through into as yet unknown passages and chambers of the cave, hoping to traverse it all the way through. The rest of the team's job was to haul equipment and rocks in the hope that they too would go down in history as part of this first traverse. The weather was good, but the forecast said there might be a thunderstorm. However, the young people, looking at the clear sky, decided not to trust the forecast and descended into the depths of the cave. After spending several hours underground, cavers Jim Cunningham and John Shepherd came to the conclusion that this wasn't for them and judged the cave too dangerous to continue through. Adamson assured them that he knew the cave and that everything would be fine, that everyone would be safe, and he talked them into staying. Not wanting to lose face, they agreed. But then the two women came to the rescue. Neither of them was a caver, and they had wanted an easy underground stroll. But this adventure was taking on an entirely different character now. They had to make their way chest deep through mud in narrow, terrifying passages. They said they wanted to turn back, and Cunningham and Shepherd volunteered to escort them. This was one of those fateful moments that determines who lives to old age and who dies young. Either way, the team split up. Two of the men and the two women turned back. As a parting shot, Ogden mocked Cunningham for using the women as an excuse to hide his own cowardice, and Morag Forbes watched as her fiancé Dave disappeared into the darkness of the cave. The group of four that had split off emerged from the cave at 5 p.m. A light rain was falling from a grey sky. Cavers Cunningham and Shepherd drove Colette to the town of Ingleton, since Adamson's group wasn't due back before midnight, and Morag Forbes stayed behind to wait for her fiancé a few kilometers from the cave entrance, at one of the local farms. Soon the rain turned to a downpour. Having checked the water level twice, Morag was alarmed by how quickly Mossdale Beck was rising. It already resembled a real river. In 3 hours, 2.5 centimeters of rain fell, and when she returned to the cave at 9 p.m., she was horrified. The entrance was a churning lake, and the current was roaring off somewhere into the depths of the rock, where her fiancé and 5 other cavers now were. In despair, she ran 2 miles to Yarnbury Farm, where the farmer called the police. By 11 p.m., a rescue operation of extraordinary scale had begun. It's worth noting that in England, cave rescue operations, even in those days, were carried out on a large scale and quite quickly, except that ordinary rescuers, firefighters, and so on, could do almost nothing in this situation. Only cavers could rescue cavers, and news of people trapped in the cave spread like wildfire. Phones rang in pubs across England, and cavers dropped what they were doing and rushed to help their fellow cavers. An important factor, of course, was that most of them were students and members of various caving clubs. Student camaraderie and the desire not to lose face in front of other universities also played their part. The phone rang at the Martin Arms pub near Ingleton, too, where Cunningham and Shepherd, unaware of the storm at Mossdale, were enjoying a pint of beer. Grabbing their still wet gear, they raced back to the cave they had left only a few hours before. Cavers from Yorkshire, Lancashire, Derbyshire, and other parts of England hurried through the pouring rain toward the limestone hill. The sight of it was terrifying. Mossdale was a lake. The cave was underwater. The situation was unprecedented. No one knew where to begin. But hundreds of people had already arrived at the site, and with practically their bare hands they began digging a trench to divert water away from the cave. Before long, farmers from nearby villages brought their tractors and began building a dam to hold back the stream flooding the cave. Several fire engines tried pumping out the water. Hundreds of people built a dam out of sandbags, but it was very unstable and could collapse at any minute. All the more so because the water level in the stream, which had already turned into a river, was still rising. Jim Eyre, who was 41 at the time, was one of the most respected cavers in Britain. Adamson had asked him to join this expedition just a week before. Eyre was ready for many things, but had always avoided the Mossdale Caverns. Despite their potential, he was convinced this cave was a killer. But now he had to go underground with the team to rescue his fellow cavers. By midday on Sunday, using 19 fire pumps, part of the water had been pumped out of the cave, and it was possible to enter again. Eyre led his team down into the still flooded cave. Cunningham and Shepherd, despite being advised to stay above ground, insisted on joining this group. Frank Barnes, nicknamed the Giant, was perhaps the most anxious of these searchers. John Ogden was a close childhood friend of his. At age 11, they had explored their first cave together. Frank knew that Ogden's father was standing outside the cave, waiting for good news about his missing son. There was still a great deal of water in the cave, and foam covered the ceiling. They crawled, holding their breath, to the rough chamber, a cave the size of a room, where they could finally stand up. The further low passages leading to the section known as the Marathon were badly flooded with water, which gurgled ominously as air began circulating through the cave once more. Air tried to encourage his group, saying they were about to hear their comrades' voices any moment. Several people did say they heard something, some kind of shouting, but it turned out to be only the howl of the draft in the cave and the gurgling of water. The cavers hurried, for if the sandbag dam burst, they themselves would be caught in a deadly trap. But the section called Far Marathon turned out to be unexpectedly dry. With no water present, the silence there was somehow unearthly. Someone even said this silence was like being in a grave. Crawling 300 meters through a very narrow passage, they reached a place where the tunnel's height was only 25 centimeters, and it was there that air found the first two bodies. They were blocking the already narrow passage of the tunnel. It was a horrifying moment. They had to move their comrades' bodies to a wider spot and crawl directly over the corpses in order to move forward. A little further on, they found three more bodies, but the sixth missing person was nowhere to be seen. Air looked around and saw that many of his team were crying, and some were retching uncontrollably. Only Woolham said quietly, "Go back, Jim, they're all dead." Radioing the surface, the cavers were ordered to return above ground immediately. Outside, things looked bad. The dam was shaking and about to collapse. It had already given way twice, and people were holding back the raging torrent through superhuman effort. 5 bodies had been found, but where was John Ogden? No one knew. An experienced caver, he might still be alive, perhaps trapped in some higher, unknown chamber, or lying somewhere unconscious in need of help. Early the next morning, 53-year-old caver Bob Leakey, who had discovered this cave, led another search team. No one knew the cave better than he did, but even he found no one. On the night from Monday to Tuesday, the cave was searched again. Mossdale became a worldwide sensation. Onlookers and film crews wandered around the cave, trying to guess John Ogden's fate. 2 caver doctors signed a statement declaring that Ogden had been swept away by the current to a place where he would never be found. But on Tuesday, at 10 p.m., Ogden's friend Brian Boardman noticed a glint of something in the darkness of the cave. Moving closer, he found a gold ring. Squeezing his way further up, he saw a boot protruding from a crack in the ceiling of the cave. The crack was almost unbelievably narrow. It seemed impossible that a person could fit inside it, and yet Ogden had somehow squeezed into it, and it seemed he had fought for his life right up to his very last breath. But help had come too late. He was already dead. They climbed back out into a grim, overcast dawn. For Ogden's father, who was still waiting at the entrance, everything became clear without a word being said. The battle was lost. Heavy rain was falling. The dam was still unstable. It would take about 5 hours to reach the bodies, and recovering them seemed altogether impossible. Coroner Stephen Brown, after consulting with the parents, the police, and the rescue leaders, obtained permission from the Home Office to hold an inquest without the bodies. He ordered the cave to be sealed forever and treated with the respect due a grave. 4 long days after 10 people had entered the cave, 300 rescuers and volunteers, exhausted, went home, leaving 6 of their comrades unburied beneath Kingsdale Moor. The rescue report states, "Never before have so many people done so much for so little reward." Such is the story of the 6 cavers whose bodies remain in the Mossdale Caverns to this day. Whatever you think about this story, write it in the comments. It will be very interesting to read. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I know many of you watch me without subscribing. Please subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it would mean a lot to me. And feel free to recommend this channel to your friends. This has been Alone versus Wilderness. See you next time.